And hello, welcome to another episode of AWS on Stack Overflow. A few of you join the channel, explore the internet. Hello out there. So, welcome to another episode of AWS on Stack Overflow. My name is John Rotenstein. I'm a developer advocate at AWS, and I like answering questions on Stack Overflow. And I thought, hey, why not share my pastime with a whole lot of other people so you too can help me answer questions on Stack Overflow. So I'd be interested who we've got out there. Happens to be watching shows at this time of night. Come along and say hi. I'm broadcasting from Sydney, Australia, where we have just hit spring and things are starting to warm up. So I'm very happy getting to broadcast, not having to wear what we call a jumper. You guys might call it a sweater. We call it a jumper. So really good for me out here these days. So if you're watching, say hi. Eddie, good to see you. Where you tuning in from? Eddie. Oh, it's my son joining into the chat. Thank you very much, my son, joining the chat. I don't recognize your user ID. That's fantastic. Okay. So let's talk about a few things that we do here today. Join on board. So you may have heard of Stack Overflow. Stack Overflow is a site for answering programming question and answers. Now, the term programming is a little bit wide. Yes, if you're asking questions about Perl, Shell, script, Python, it's a great place to get answers. But it's also a great place to get answers for things to do with AWS and the cloud. Because, hey, you could program a Lambda function, and that definitely is programming. But what about S3? If you're connecting to S3, yeah, that's sort of programming. The borders get a little bit strange, but a lot of people like to use Stack Overflow for answering things to do with AWS, so that's where I like to answer things. So we'll jump in and have a look at some questions that are out there. So what I generally do is I hop in and I have a look for any questions that are tagged. So you can see up here, I'm looking for questions tagged with Amazon or AWS that do not yet have an accepted answer. An accepted answer means somebody has asked a question, they've said yes, somebody has answered the question to my satisfaction, and so there's no need to necessarily add additional answers there. So I leave them out of my little search list. And there's a variety of topics. For those of you not too familiar with Stack Overflow, there is of course the question as a title. If I call this question up, the title, a lot of people ignore the title, the importance of the title, because that's what attracts people to try and answer your particular question. Within your question, you can put in lots of detail. This question, for example, seems to be having a lot of information. And wow, it was asked 19 minutes ago by a user called Seth. And Marcin, a great Stack Overflow user, managed to answer it only 8 seconds ago and actually just made an update to the answer. So as you can see, questions get answered really, really quickly on Stack Overflow. I did some analysis one time and I found that of questions on Stack Overflow related to AWS, where they do get an answer, because not all questions get an answer, but where they do get an answer comes 50% of the time, it comes within half an hour. So if you're going to get an answer, it'll pretty much come within the first half hour, because there are people all around the world trying to answer questions about Stack Overflow. Hey Brad, it's good to have you back online. Who else is watching us out there in where are you from? Is it late night for you in the USA? Is it daytime in Australia? Is it the early morning in Singapore? Great to have you on board. So other things to point out about Stack Overflow, of course, we have these little up arrows and down arrows where you can say a question shows research effort. Is it useful and clear? And the great thing about that is you can reward people for asking good questions, and you can sort of penalize people for asking questions that are not that great. So this one shows a fair bit of research. You know, they're saying, I haven't read it. I'm looking at doing this and that. They've listed a lot of information, so you could go, oh, that looks like a particular question. Whereas sometimes there are questions out there, I'll see if I can find one, that just have one-line questions. And they're typically an indication of new users or people who haven't really thought about what they're asking. Yep, here's one. Let's have a look at this one. I'm using Django, which is a Python framework for a server hosted on EC2. I want to use Celery in Django, and I'm wondering how can I set up a Celery server on AWS? So not a very detailed question because it doesn't say, I tried this, these were the specific problems I had. Can you help me with a particular thing? So on Stack Overflow, we like it when people come up with very specific questions. And one reason for that is Stack Overflow is not really a site for asking questions, getting answers. Think of it as an encyclopedia that everyone is building, much like Wikipedia, in fact, a wiki. And people can come later on who are having the same problem and they can find answers to their questions. So it's really great that people can find answers to their specific problems. So a general thing like this, how to use Celery, the Python app on EC2, might be a bit too general. Thanks, Brads, for the t-shirt. This is quite an old AWS one. I'm a AWS ninja. I have a large collection of AWS t-shirts. In fact, I did an audit of my cupboard one time, and I have over 100 t-shirts, most of which I did not pay for, and they either have my current employer AWS, my previous employer Atlassian, we had some quite good t-shirts, or various other events that I've been to. So most of my wardrobe is sponsored by people. I wonder if that's what happens when rock stars come along and they can have other people pay for their clothing. So if you've just come along and joined us, my name is John and I'll be answering some Stack Overflow questions. I've marked some to come back to and have a look, but let's have a quick look at any questions asked recently. See if we can beat Marson answering some of those questions. Now, nobody's an expert in everything to do with AWS, so it can sometimes be hard to find questions that can always answer. Here's an interesting one. Why are outputs different? It says Tiger06. As per the output below, it looks like zones 1 is an array and the other 2 are a string Y. So they're running this AWS describe availability zones command on a particular region, and the query command. The query command, I heard it described fantastic. The AWS CLI, command line interface, hey Gooden, has 2 parameters you often use, a query parameter and a filter parameter. And I heard a great description. The query parameter is like an SQL select statement where you say which fields you want out of the information. And the filter statement is like a where statement where you can say which lines you want to come out of it. So in this case, they're saying, could I please get the zone ID, my availability zones? And this is really interesting and worth talking about. Hop into the VPC console. Because zone IDs are something that used to be hidden a long time ago, but we have now started revealing on AWS. And it needs a bit of a background to explain what's going on. So if I was to go into subnets in my VPC, my virtual private cloud console, this is where we create virtual networks in AWS. And I say I would like to create a subnet. A subnet is a part of a network, and each subnet must live within a particular availability zone. An availability zone being a data center or group of data centers physically separated from other availability zones in the same region. And what happens is we name all of our availability zones after the region. So AP Southeast 2, Asia Pacific Southeast 2 is the Sydney region. And then we name them A, B, and C. And due to human psychology, if you offer people a choice, what do you want, A, B, C? They don't know. They just keep picking A. And we didn't want everyone to put their infrastructure in zone A and nothing in the other ones. So somebody thought it would be a really smart idea to randomize the names of the availability zones so that depending on your AWS account, zone A for you might be zone V for me, might be zone C for somebody else. And that means you can't rely on the same physical data center matching the names, which normally doesn't matter. There are some situations where it does matter. So if you have 2 accounts and you want to make sure that one has a resource in A and one has a resource in B and they're not in the same place, you need to know which ones they are. Anyway, cut forward, we realized this wasn't necessarily the smartest idea because a lot of people get confused. All new regions do not use this randomization, but we have now shown you this zone ID. So you can see my Asia Pacific 2A, we call zone 3. My B is 1, my C is 2. So if you were to call this up in your AWS account, it might actually look something different to you. So that's what's meant by the zone ID in this question. So let's have a look what they're doing here. They are trying to describe availability zones for Sydney. Yay! Show the zone ID. And then they're trying to echo the first zone. They should do that in the AWS command line interface rather than that. And then they're saying zone, zone 0 equals that. Zone 1 equals exactly the same thing. Oh, and sure enough, Martin has managed to jump in because this question's an hour old, and having a look at what's coming out from the array. I don't quite know what the question you're asking is, but there is an answer. I'm going to try this on my own account and see what happens. So describe availability zones for the Sydney region and show me all of my zone IDs on here. Let's take that off. I think I've got to put that in quotes. Magic then happens. So it looks like I'm getting back 3, 1, and 2. Let's run that again, taking off the last bit of information there. And output it not in text, get it in JSON and see what comes back. So it looks like I'm getting back the fact that I have my A maps to zone 3, my B maps to zone 1, and my C maps to zone 2, which should match what we had coming up here in the console. That should be showing the same thing. What else is it saying? Opt-in status. Opt-in, we are continually adding new regions on AWS. If I have a look at how many regions we have out there at the moment, anyone know before I look? How many regions, how many availability zones? You thought 24 regions, you are correct. Plus 3 announced, 77 AZs. As we keep adding more regions, companies do not necessarily want to use the additional regions that are out there. And it can be a bit of a pain to change the permissions to stop people launching in Hong Kong, Bahrain, Milan, etc. So as of a while ago, all new regions start off disabled in an account, and you've got to opt into them to get them going. So Sydney is an older region, so opt-in is not required. So you automatically get access to that. If I was to run this command in another region, what's the code for Bahrain? I think it'd be, I don't know. This is a handy service and endpoints page we'll put in here. Hey, Jenny Rain. Bahrain. Bahrain is ME South, Middle East South 1. If I put that in my command, it should come up and say, ooh, it's not very happy. I probably have not enabled that region in my account. Therefore, it is not recognizing me and I can't get anything out of that other region. So there. But that is an explanation for what they were trying to do in this question that Marcin has answered. So for those of you who have recently joined, hi, my name is John. I'm a developer advocate at AWS, and I like answering Stack Overflow questions because I learned so much. Like, I never knew that I couldn't make an API call to a region that I didn't have enabled, and now I've just learned something out of it. Let's keep looking for some interesting questions. How many of you out there ever answer questions on Stack Overflow? I'd like to hear from you if you ever do. Hop into my bookmarked questions. Mark some earlier that are worth looking at. So SQL. Is SQL a programming language? It's a language. It's a way of getting data out. Is it a programming language? Well, you'll find lots of SQL questions on Stack Overflow. I think there's also another Stack Exchange site which does SQL. To explain, Stack Overflow is just one of many sites provided by Stack Exchange. It's the most famous site. It's the biggest one here, Stack Overflow, which officially is Q&A for professional and enthusiast programmers. But I think you will also find that there is a site dedicated to the SQL, or at least this one here, database administrators who want to improve their database skills. So you might occasionally be told to move your question from Stack Overflow to another. So here we have an SQL question. I'm not going to delve into this SQL question. The one thing I want to point out is an awful lot of SQL questions are answered by this gentleman, Gordon Linoff. And you'll see he has over 1,000 K reputation, which means over 1 million. So he is, I think, the #2 user on Stack Overflow. Let's have a look. For this year, he is #1. For all time, he is #2, carefully catching up on John Skeet, who is the most highly ranked person on Stack Overflow for having answered a mind-bogglingly huge number of questions over time, which introduces the concept of reputation on Stack Overflow. So whenever you ask a question or answer a question, you get some reputation points. And if people upvote your question or upvote your answer, you get more reputation points. And it's a way of measuring how you are on Stack Overflow. So apparently I'm in almost the top 500 of Stack Overflow of all time. Then you can break it down by week, by month, by year, etc. And it's all based on how many reputation points you get out there. So lots of interesting stats. They have millions and millions of users on Stack Overflow, but most of them have a little bit. So thank you, Gordon. In fact, if you go to his website that is linked to, you can see, you might be able to see, I saw a picture one time of Gordon Linoff. He's the amazing SQL data mining answering guru on Stack Overflow. Thank you very much, Gordon. Okay, into some AWS questions. Good, no one's answered this one. Let's have a look at it. Not able to receive messages from SNS. So somebody's trying to send, see, they're using a publish request for SNS. SNS is our simple notification service that allows you to receive notifications. It's a publish subscribe model. So you can receive notifications by email, by SMS, by push to an HTTP endpoint, lots of different ways. It looks like they're trying to send a message to a particular phone number and they're not receiving the message. Still facing this issue. Let's go to SNS and have a look. One thing I have noticed of late is SNS. I have seen more and more reports of people not necessarily getting messages from SNS via SMS, and some of it might be to do with the identifier that's used in SMS messages. So I can create a topic in SNS, call it my stack topic, just go with default options, and I can then subscribe to this topic. And when I subscribe, I can say I want to subscribe an HTTP endpoint, receive an email message, push a message to our simple queuing service, trigger a Lambda function whenever a message comes, or receive a phone call via SMS. Another way to send a phone message is you've got text messaging straight in the console here. So I could publish a text message and say, I want to send a message. There's two types of messages, promotional and transactional. Theoretically, promotional is a bit like spam, so people might have limits on the number of promotional messages you're meant to send. Whereas transactional is things like, thank you for your purchase, here's your receipt. So it's things that should not be spam-like in nature, but the definitions are a bit hard. So you can send a message in here, and this is the thing I mentioned, a sender ID. It used to be possible that you could put a sender ID in there, so you could say it came from Santa Claus, and when you receive the message on your phone, it would have the name Santa Claus. Now, a lot of people can send out spam messages and you don't necessarily know who they come from. So there's been some additional limitations put on the sender ID you can use in SNS. And I'll see whether it's this page. So different countries in which you can use SMS, and you'll see this column here, supports sender IDs. So some countries allow you to use a sender ID, and some countries, Belarus, for example, senders are required to pre-register their alphabetic sender ID. So it's okay to send a message with a funny ID, but people want to be able to track down who it was that sent the message. So some countries require you to register that. And how many countries are doing that? Egypt, India must use a pre-registered alphabetic ID. Jordan, Kuwait. See a certain pattern in some of these countries. Philippines, Russia. So some countries need you to do that. That person was using +91. What country is +91? India. Aha. So this might well be the answer, because I noticed that India, if you are using a sender ID, requires you to use a pre-registered one. So it could be that if they were trying to send a message with a particular sender ID, we go back here, does not look like they were using a sender ID, but I think you can set a default sender ID. I'm not too sure. So that might be one reason they had it. And then send a message to me. I shouldn't show you my phone number. So I've just sent a message to my mobile phone, and I'll see if I get a message coming up. As I said, I have seen SNS not do a great job of sending out text messages of late, and it might be due to certain countries. So just to add a comment to this. There are answers and there are comments on Stack Overflow. Stack Overflow answers are where you say, hey, this is the solution to your problem. Comments are where you get to say, I'm not really sure. Can I ask you some more questions about it? So I'm going to put a comment in here. Send these, and a nice little tool here that I use that allows me to copy a page link in Markdown format, so I can go back and just paste it in, and it will put a link there. Not have a solution, but I'll just let them know that that might factor into what's happening. Otherwise, you'd have to be in the country to really test if that came through. And strangely enough, my message has not come through to me. So either I use the wrong phone number, or something is being restricted there on SNS of sending text messages. So something good to call AWS support. Talking of which, I may as well mention different AWS support levels. So AWS support is really good, really handy. All plans. There are four different levels of support. There's one here called Developer, Business, Enterprise, and there's what I call free support. And if you have not done anything to sign up for support, then you are on free support. Now, free support basically means you can ask a question on the forums, somebody might answer, somebody from the community might answer, but basically no support. It's only once you start paying for support that you get support. A developer has a slow turnaround. It's like in a 24-hour turnaround, but it's a very low cost. It's only $29 a month, or 3% of your bill. So very, very useful to get answers for a fixed price if you're hardly using AWS. So really, really good. Sevian, you asked, does SNS sandbox you by default like the emailing service does? No, SNS does not have a sandboxing feature for restricting what you can send. There might be a limit on the total number of, look at that, I like being distracted. Quotas. There's an option in the console called service quotas. Let's see if SQS mentions anything in there. Oh, SNS. Oh my gosh. Confirm subscriptions, email deliveries, endpoints, messages published per second. So there's 1,500 messages a second. That could do something. If we type in SMS, transactions per second, so 150 transactions per second, but it is adjustable, so you can ask for that to be increased. Promotional SMS message delivery, only 20. That's interesting. Wow. That's really restricting the number of promotional messages you can send. So that's where you can say, was it transactional, promotional? The amount of spend, that's interesting. We by default limit you to $1 per what? SMS spending in USD. Doesn't say what it is. Maximum amount in US dollar you can spend on on a single SMS message. Okay. And transactional rates 20 per second, 20 for promotional, 20 for, okay. So you can increase, not many of them. So there are quite severe limits on the number of SMS messages you could send. And I still haven't got that on my phone, so don't know what's happening there. So we were talking about support. I highly encourage you, if you're doing stuff with AWS and you sometimes need to find answers, Stack Overflow is a great place to ask. But you can sign up for the developer account, $29 US a month. You can ask as many questions as you want. And the important thing is support is not just, I have a problem, please fix it for me. They love getting questions about, how should I do this? How would I best architect my app? Maybe not a whole architecture, but I'm planning on doing this. You know, I want to send thousands of SMS messages a second. Can I do that through AWS rather than saying, oh dear, I just tried it and it failed. What should I do? Then we have higher levels, business support and enterprise, which goes at $100 or 10% and $15,000. Yes, many enterprise customers pay $15,000 plus on their AWS support because they want really fast turnaround. And some of the response times are like a business critical system down for under 15 minutes. They also get a technical account manager assigned to them. And a technical account manager is an AWS staff member who works specifically with just a small number of customers, knows their business very well, and can assist them with any problems that they might have. So it's like having a personal contact within AWS who you can ask questions for. So, didn't solve the SMS one. Oh, I like this question. I'm currently making a website for movie streaming on demand and I'm stuck at web hosting. I want to use AWS as it's the cloud, which makes it easy for me to upgrade in the future if needed. And I like their heading. What do I use for creating platforms like Netflix or Prime Video? So I highly encourage people to think they'll be the next Netflix. But as somebody I saw pointed out here, a streaming platform isn't going to use any single product. You're going to use multiple products. S3, CloudFront, etc. So let's have a think about that. Streaming, first of all. Streaming requires you to store an awful lot of video, and S3 is great for storing that. I heard that Netflix one time brought on the Disney catalog. This was many, many years ago, and they had to re-encode all of the Disney films to run on Netflix. And when Netflix encodes video, they don't just encode it for a standard 1920 by 1080. They actually encode it for fitting on a mobile phone, for fitting on an iPad, for fitting on lots of different devices. So they have to encode like 20 different formats. And they did that by spinning up a whole lot of AWS Spot instances, encoding lots of things in parallel over 1 week and then just turning them off again. So really great way to have some burst capacity in the cloud, re-encode everything. So you'd certainly use S3 for storing. There's also a number of AWS services which I'm not always that familiar with, but it's called AWS Elemental. And Elemental was a company that Amazon bought out and have incorporated into AWS. And they've got a whole lot of very interesting services. Media Convert, which is great for what I just mentioned, for converting file formats between lots of things, bigger, smaller, different sizes. Media Connect is for sending video across parts of the world between systems. Media Live is relevant. This is for doing live broadcasting, packaging, tailing, storing your media, finding it, serving it, etc. So a lot of these AWS Elemental services would be very handy for that person asking about how they would stream. So let's give a bit of an answer. On S3 is ideal. Page. The main thing, however, is when you're streaming in the browser, you don't really need a streaming service to send it. Sometimes you can just point to a data store like S3 with something intelligent in the browser and it can read it out. So being a service where somebody would want to be paid for their streaming, they probably want to have some form of security so they don't just make all the things in S3 public. So we have something called a pre-signed URL in S3. And it's one of my favorite features of S3. I have a link here. So a pre-signed URL in S3 allows you to have a private object in S3, but grant temporary access to it via a URL. So let's say you go into a photo sharing service and you look at your photos. Those photos are private. How is your browser getting to show those photos if they're private photos? And the answer is they can generate a pre-signed URL, which for a limited time, maybe only for 5 minutes, will give access to a photo, but after that 5-minute period, the link no longer works. So this is a great way, in this case, to stream video, provide access to a file for a limited time once they've verified their login. I don't know much about streaming, but there's a few things for the reader to have a look at. That's another thing about Stack Overflow. You are highly encouraged to answer, even if you are not an expert on the topic, because other people can add additional answers on there. And somebody else's question might be voted up and your question might be voted down. You can always delete your question. In fact, there's a badge you get for being downvoted and then for deleting your question because you're a good citizen. You are removing what people deem to be not great content on Stack Overflow. So don't be too afraid about answering things on Stack Overflow you might not know about. Fun fact, Brad says, Netflix has their own hardware. A lot of ISP data centers serve the content. Yes. Netflix server ISP box. See if we can find these. Netflix Open Connect. So you might wonder, how does Netflix serve all of this content to people all around the world? Thanks for this tip, Brads. If they had to serve it all from their own data center, they would be chewing up massive amounts of the internet. In fact, Netflix, some old articles I used to have said that Netflix was consuming 1/3 of internet bandwidth around. So Netflix has dropped to second place in terms of global internet traffic behind combined total web-based streaming services. I presume that means things like YouTube and all that, Twitch and all that combined beat Netflix. But Netflix has, here is, video accounted for 60% of total downstream volume worldwide. So downstream volume of internet, 60%. You can understand that video is a lot of data going through every second. It's going to chew up a lot of data out there. It found that Google and various apps, including YouTube and Android, accounted for 12% of overall internet traffic. BitTorrent is over 20% of upstream traffic and 44% in Europe. Facebook apps took 17% down. So incredible. You know, I never thought it'd be possible for people to watch streaming video online, but they can. So this is how they do it. Rather than streaming everything from the central Netflix office, they have this box called Open Connect. I'm just looking for some good pictures here. And the idea is they have this box and they give it to big internet service providers, ISPs, and the ISPs can put it within their network. And let's go image Netflix Open Connect. So it's boxes like this that you can put. You don't need racks of them, but you put it in the data center. So you might have a ISP. So here in Australia, we have one called Optus, for example. And Optus, rather than taking all the traffic from Netflix and then serving it on, Optus can put these boxes not only within their network, they can put it in many places within the network. And the benefit of that is the closer they put it to the end viewer, the less traffic has to stream through the whole network. So viewers still have to log on to Netflix and be authorized and be pointed to one of these boxes, but these boxes will then serve the traffic from within the internet service provider themselves. So it cuts down on the whole internet traffic. So there's actually a lot more internet traffic happening. It just doesn't go fully across the internet. And that's how Netflix manages to serve so much traffic out to various users. Thanks for that pointer there, Brads. Oh, I've got some interesting stuff up here. Let's have a look at a few of them. Oh yes, a recent announcement. AWS has improved, they've added new fields for the instance metadata service. We've introduced 5 fields to the instance metadata service: region, placement group, partition number, host ID, and availability zone ID. You can see these fields after you launch an instance. So this is worth understanding. Let's say we have an EC2 instance. I'll log into an EC2 instance. We have something called the metadata service, and you can get to this metadata service by going to 169.254.169.254/latest version, and it brings up and says, what do you want? I want the metadata service, so I'll attach that to my URL. It then brings up a whole lot of information that I can look at about the EC2 instance that I'm running on. So this is only available on an EC2 instance if you go to this magical URL and you ask for metadata. And this is really useful for getting things like, what is my public IP address? So if I was to add that to the end of my line that I just did, it's funny. No, I don't want public key, I want public IPv4. So this is telling me this is the public IP address that my instance has been assigned. Normally an instance doesn't know its public IP address, it just uses private IP address. That's how it can find it out. Other things you can do: what's my host name, what are my IAM security credentials that I'm currently running on the box. So if you assign an IAM role to an EC2 instance, this is how it gets its credentials. Now let's have a look at what they've added here. They say they've added a region, and this is really handy because we have this thing called placement. And previously, oh no, that's zone. So previously, all it ever told you was the availability zone in which you're in. And if you wanted to get the region name, so you're doing something in a script and you needed the region, you had to take the availability zone and chop off that last character. And this causes lots of people various problems. So it looks like they've now added the region to the list. We can find where it is. Ooh, not there. Have a look here. Region placement / region is apparently available. If that's out there, I didn't see it listed. Now, this is interesting. It's not available on my machine. When EC2 releases a new instance metadata category, the new category might not be available for existing instances. You need to stop and start the instance. So let's give that a try. This will be a wonderful test. So under placement, my region was not available. We'll go and stop this instance. Start it again. As you might know, when you stop an instance, the physical server that is being used to host your instance, the virtual machine is taken away from that server, so you don't have to pay for the machine while it's stopped. That's why I have quite a few stop machines here. I don't need to pay for it. But when you start it again, you are likely going to be allocated a virtual machine on a different host box. So if you think something's going wrong with the host machine running your instance, stop, start an instance, and you'll go somewhere else. You might also receive a new public IP address. So if you have ticked a box when launching your instance, when you say auto assign public IP address and you say yes, please auto assign a public IP address, that public IP address will likely change when you stop and start your instance. If you want to keep the same public IP address, you should be using a elastic IP address. An elastic IP address is a static IP address. So you can say, give me a static IP address, assign it to my account, and then I can come in and say associated with a particular EC2 instance. And that way that instance will keep the same public IP address even when it's stopped and started. They are not charged if you attach them to a running instance, but if you are just grabbing an IP address and not using it, then you are charged ½ cent an hour. So I'm going to release that one back out again. My instance should be up and running by now. So let's reconnect and I will run that command again, and it didn't work. That's interesting. It has not given me the new metadata. I stopped and started my instance. My instance too old. I'm sad. Data changes. Well, let's launch. I really want to see if this works. Let's launch a brand new instance. Fantastic. Default everything will be my metadata instance. Very fast to launch an instance here. For those of you who just joined me, hi, my name is John. I'm a developer advocate at AWS, and I enjoy answering Stack Overflow questions about AWS topics. And as you've seen, I often get sidetracked and answer many different things, but this is a great way to learn about AWS when things come out and you play with them. Best way to know AWS is to play with the service. So I'm currently having a look at this new feature which has just come out. We have apparently introduced new instance metadata categories, including region, placement group. A placement group, I mentioned before that when you run a virtual machine, it gets put on a server in the data center. We have, think of them as racks if you want, and placement groups control where multiple machines are located. So let's say you want to have two machines and you want to have very fast bandwidth between them. You can put them in the same placement group and ask for the placement group to be as close as possible in the data center as we can, and that will give very high network bandwidth. Or you can ask for a spread placement group. Groups, there's lots of different types. A spread placement group allows you to spread your resources across different bits of equipment. So a cluster placement group puts things as close as possible. Logical grouping to get very high speed. Enjoy a higher per flow limit of up to 10 gigabits per second for traffic. A partition placement group is when you can say, I want to make sure my resources are on different bits of equipment to reduce the likelihood of correlated hardware failures. And the spread placement group is where you can say, please put everything on distinct racks where each rack has a different network and power. So really reduce chance of anything going wrong with more than one instance at a time. And that information was not previously available on the instance, but it is now passed through. Let's log into this new instance and see if we can see that feature coming up. I have a shortcut log into an instance using my key pair. I will now run that command and hopefully, yes, it worked. So looks like old instances might not get the metadata updates. I'm not too sure what classifies that as being an old instance or not. So we're getting the region, we're getting the partition information, host ID, and that new availability zone ID that we mentioned, the one that has the unique identifier for the availability zone. Zone ID. Let's see if we can do that. Ooh, lots of comments. Be with you in a sec. Okay, it's come through. Just looking back at some of the comments. There's a bit unpleasant sound spikes coming through in me. Oh, terribly sorry about that. Let me know if that is on there. I'll keep an eye. I do have a fan occasionally spinning up next to me. Maybe it isn't available on T2. Could be. It has been rolled out to Sydney, so we just proved that. Surprised they don't have a DNS record for the metadata IP. That's an interesting thing. So domain names mapping to IP addresses is a function of Route 53. And since we're on the topic, I may as well show you how I've set that up for my machine. Here I have my ops instance, and I have allocated a elastic IP address. So you'll see this address here ending with 77. And that is my public IP address. And what I've then got is an entry in Route 53. Do you say route or route? I'm Australian, so I say route, but I've trained myself to say route. Hey, wizard, like watching an AWS course for free. There's fantastic content out there on the internet. Lots of AWS information. Looking forward to reInvent this year. reInvent normally held just after Thanksgiving, so late November, early December. Will be online this year, so there'll be lots of talks on there. So you don't have to go to Vegas. Oh, get to watch them all online for free. Yay! So in my DNS settings here for Route 53, I have my own domain name that I call jrclass.net based on my initials. And I have an entry for my ops machine. And you'll notice this IP address, this 77 address, maps to my public IP address. So I can theoretically connect to my machine by doing this. I'll demonstrate and then I'll explain how I'm doing it. I can say that I want to SSH into my ops.jrclass.net. It'll refuse the connection because I didn't give it a key pair, but it has successfully tried to connect to my ops machine. So how does it do that? It takes the name ops.jrclass.net, goes to my Route 53 DNS entry. So I own that domain. So Route 53 will resolve that domain. I have a subdomain called ops with an A record. An A record in DNS is used to say, hey, resolve to this particular IP address. I've got this IP address ending with 77. We go to my EC2 screen, to my Elastic IP screen, we've got this 77 address here, and I can see it is associated with a particular EC2 instance, and if I click that link, it reveals that that EC2 instance is my ops instance. So rather than having to remember that IP address, I can just go to ops and it will connect into there. And because I'm using a static IP address, it will always stay with that same IP address. Yeah, Vegas is looking a little bit disappointing at the moment. There was a great video online. Piff the Magic Dragon, who you might be aware of from America's Got Talent and the Penn and Teller show. He's got some great videos that he's doing in Vegas at the moment, and the streets are empty in Vegas. I don't know if Vegas has reopened yet, but no reinvent in Vegas this year. The good thing is what happens in Vegas always goes on YouTube, so you can always watch the videos afterwards. So that was my news about the new features in the instance metadata service. Has anyone else got the problems with sound in there? Thanks for pointing that out to me, Wizard in there. Let me know if my sound, check out for a nice smooth sound in there. Got a bit of a filter on my OBS sound thing, so it cuts out some background noise, but it might be when I don't say anything, it goes pretty silent. Thanks, Jenny. No one else has noticed the issue. It is therefore your problem. Reminds me of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Who likes the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? Problem, I think it is. There's a great quote from, yes, when the Heart of Gold spaceship, which generates infinite improbability and therefore travels through every point in the universe at the same time, when it stops going, it returns to normality. And Trillian, the character who was talking over the loudspeaker, said, "We have normality. Anything you still can't cope with is therefore your own problem." So it sounds like the sound might be your own problem, or it might be my problem. Thanks for letting me know. Let's go to answer another question here. And whoo-hoo, no one's answered it. I have thousands of JSON files stored in S3. JSON, JavaScript object notation. I don't even think what it means sometimes. JSON, JavaScript object notation. Indeed, it's a way of storing information that is very Python-esque, actually. You can take bit of JSON and store it in a Python variable and it understands it straight away. Much better than using XML. For those of you who used to use XML with lots of angle brackets, it was a pain. But there is also YAML these days. YAML is a good alternative to using JSON. JSON still has lots of curly brackets, whereas YAML just has indents and new lines and various funny symbols in there. And it's a bit easier. It's harder to get things wrong in YAML. And in case you're interested, YAML stands for YAML Ain't Markup Language. So it's one of these recursive acronyms. Yeah. So thousands of JSON files stored in S3 text files effectively. They're repeated across files. I'm not interested in the values, just the keys. I'm trying to find an efficient way to merge all these files into a single JSON file. I've tried using Glue, but the crawler didn't collect anything. Any ideas on how this can be achieved? Yeah, I thought it was yet another markup language as well, but apparently Wikipedia must be right. Another, does it have it there? Yet another. Oh, originally, you are right. You are right, Brads. Originally, YAML meant yet another markup language but it was then repurposed as recursive acronym. Distinguish its purpose as data-oriented rather than document markup. Okay. So they're basically saying they've got lots of files in S3. They want to merge them, but they're not just merging them. They want to extract. Normally it's a key value pair. If we look at a JSON file normally has keys and values. The street address that's the key and this is the value. So they just want to grab the keys, which is quite unusual. Somebody has linked to another Stack Overflow article all about concatenating files on S3 back from 2019. And like I answered this one back then. This was to do with Athena. The simple answer is there's no easy way to concatenate files on S3. You've got to download them, smush them together and re-upload them. You could be smart and you could download them, and as you are uploading, you could simply upload the content from one file, the content from another file, and all that into the one file by uploading parts. It's called a multi-part upload. Or you could just do it all locally on disk and upload the final file. But I don't know about this thing trying to pull out the keys. You would have to use something that can parse the JSON files and extract the keys that are going out there. So I put a comment on here a few hours ago saying, what do you mean by just the keys? This is another tip. When you're asking things on Stack Overflow, it can be very handy to give some examples of what you're trying to do. For example, here is my input data and here is what I want to get out. If you're asking a question about SQL, that can be very, very useful. Certainly worth doing. So many times I go in there and say, can you please give any example of what you're doing out there? Time for something else interesting. I found this article online from a week or so ago. Engineer admits he wiped 456 Cisco WebEx virtual machines from AWS. Oops. After leaving the business and derailed 16,000 team accounts. So apparently a Cisco employee pleaded guilty. He worked until 2018. He had deliberately connected to their AWS systems without authorization 5 months after leaving the company. And he deployed code from his Google Cloud project that deleted 456 virtual machines. So, what do they say? To err is human, but to really stuff up requires a computer. I think to really stuff up requires the cloud, because with one keystroke, you can do so much. It's very easy to deploy resources in AWS. It's also easy to destroy resources. And this points out that, first of all, they should not have had access to AWS 5 months after leaving the company. So clearly something is wrong with that company's management of their security credentials. And another thing is they should use multi-factor authentication, which can be one of these little token things that you carry around with yourself. Your picture. Yeah, these sort of keys that you can stick into a machine and then touch it, and that can generate the code. So the great thing about that is the whole idea with multi-factor authentication is you're trying to prove more than one thing. A password proves what you know. One of these devices proves what you physically have. So by having what you know and what you touch, no one else can pretend they're you because they don't have that thing. If you share your password with somebody else, or if somebody steals your device, they can't log in because they don't know the password you've got. So multi-factor is a great way of doing it, and can be a good way of stopping people getting access. So when they leave the company, they have to hand back in the device. But by all means, try and... you can also use your virtual device. So I'll show you here. I have a virtual MFA type thing running on my phone, which gives codes for various accounts that I'm running, and every 30 seconds the codes tick over. So the virtual device could be what's on your phone. You can actually cheat, because unlike one of the physical devices, which has to have, it's a one-off device and no one else has that, you could put the same code into your phone and have multiple people with that same code. So it's less secure, but it's also beneficial because multiple people could have a code, which is very handy in case it's the emergency must use to log in type code. So step one, I'd say to this person, please lock out people when they've left the company. Please use multi-factor authentication for important things and restrict who can delete things. You know, if this is production, there should be effectively hardly anyone in the company who can terminate production equipment without going through the right process. So never good to hear it, but processes do tend to count. Cost Cisco at 1.4 million in employee time and over $1 million in customer refunds. They're managed by OAuth. You'd think that once they've left the company, they've left the company's Active Directory or something like that, and you can tie in AWS to Active Directory by using federated login. So there, don't let it be your company that appears on that news broadcast next time. Blockchain. What's the peer name if we add 2 members on Amazon Managed Blockchain? I have no idea about blockchain, but I thought this is really, really interesting because I've never actually seen any AWS questions on Stack Overflow to do with managed blockchain. So what is managed blockchain and our blockchain services? Let's have a look. This is the learn stuff you've never known before. Where is blockchain? Okay, so we have a blockchain service called Amazon Managed Blockchain, which is effectively running in Ireland, not in Sydney. It's effectively running the central store for a blockchain for you, not Bitcoin. I think they use Ethereum and a few other ones there. Hyperledger Fabric, run it on there. We also have another service called Quantum Ledger Database, and it's worth explaining the difference between these two. So blockchain was all the rage a while back. Some people still think it is. What is the price for Bitcoin these days? 15,000 Australian dollar. Let's convert to US dollar. In the history of blockchain for the last few years. So we can see historically, one time it went up very high to almost 20,000 US. And then it dropped down to about 3,000 US. And it's recently recovered and it's running around about that 10,000 US dollar thing. There's some great books out there on blockchain if you don't understand it. Some great videos you can read. But of course, blockchain is a distributed ledger of information. So lots of computers have a copy of the ledger and they use a mining process to add new blocks onto the chain. And a lot of people were saying to Amazon, hey, why don't you introduce a blockchain service? And we held back a little bit and asked our customers, why do you want blockchain? And we came out with 2 interesting use cases. They are nothing to do with Bitcoin. The 2 use cases are sometimes you want to have a distributed ledger. I read a story in The Economist one time where somebody in some third world country, somebody came to their door and said, we need you to move out. Why? Well, we own your home. And somebody had bribed the land administration office in this particular country and bribed somebody to get a certificate made up saying they own the land, and then they took over the people's land and they kicked them out. This is not good, the idea that you could bribe somebody in a government and take possession. And a lot of countries are now looking at using blockchain for real estate transactions. And this is a way of proving ownership of real assets, real estate. And a lot of countries are now saying we would like to utilize blockchain technology as a way of proving ownership in land. So if you go and bribe one government official, they can't change the record because the record is distributed amongst many machines in blockchain format, and those records cryptographically signed. And if you want to historically change a record, you would have to have a whole lot of blockchain mining capability to do there. So one service that we are offering is called Amazon Managed Blockchain, which can help you manage that distributed service. So for Hyperledger Fabric and Ethereum frameworks, distributed ledger of information out there to avoid fraud, to prove things. Another use case people wanted was the ability to prove a transaction or prove that a transaction did not take place. For example, imagine you work in a company and you are the database administrator, and or let's say you're working for the government and somebody did a traffic fine and they want you to clear that traffic fine off, and they might give you $20 if you clear that fine off. As the database administrator, you might be able to go into the database and delete the record that said you got that traffic fine, and the record just totally disappears. And there's no way to prove that you didn't do that because you're the database administrator. So you could delete the line, and then maybe you could delete the entry from the log file that said you deleted the line. And if you've got enough power on a computer system, you can claim, you can make it look to do anything. So this other concept that came up is the Quantum Ledger Database, a database with transparent, immutable, and cryptographically verifiable transaction log. So the Quantum Ledger database, as it does transactions, it creates a blockchain. And the idea in a blockchain is each chain builds upon the previous chain. So you can't change a transaction in a previous record without modifying the cryptographic signature on later blocks. So it's a way of proving nothing was changed in the database beforehand. We can verify that the information in the database is as it is meant to be. It has not been bypassed through any method. So that's what the Quantum Ledger database is good for. So since this is the first question I've seen on Amazon Managed Blockchain, I can do something interesting down here. You'll notice there are tags associated with this question to do with Hyperledger Fabric and AWS. And I can add a tag here. And let's call it this thing called Amazon Managed Blockchain is the name. I can come here and add a new, whoops. I will add a new tag. Now, when you add a new tag, it comes up and says, whoa, it doesn't exist. Did you intend to create the tag? And you can say, yep, I want to create the tag. And then a good thing to do is not just create the tag, but to go in and help add some information about that particular tag. And I'm going to do that by going to the documentation for blockchain. And why write a description myself when I can just copy it from the documentation? Amazon Managed Blockchain is a fully managed service for creating and managing blockchain networks using open source framework. Allows you to build applications where multiple parties can securely and transparently run transactions and share data without the need for a trusted central authority. And I will put a link to that. But that is doing good work for tags within AWS. And yes, there are also badges you can get for editing multiple tags within. So I can go to my settings, I can see badges, and I don't know which tags these are. StackOverflow tag editing badge. How to earn the tag editor badge on StackOverflow. So tag editor. Here we are. If you edit a wiki tag, you can get the tag editor badge. If you edit 50 wiki tags, you can get the research assistant badge. And apparently I do not yet have that. So that is now contributed towards me getting the badge. Fantastic. If you've just joined me, my name is John. I'm a developer advocate working at AWS, and I like to answer Stack Overflow questions, and I like to get sidetracked while answering Stack Overflow questions. So thank you for joining me and playing with lots of AWS technologies as we look at things on Stack Overflow. Where are you all from around the world? Let me know where you're calling in from. How do you get reputation for people using your new tag? I don't think you get reputation for people using a tag, but you can of course get reputation for answering a tag. So if I click on Amazon Web Services, for example, we recently passed 100,000 questions tagged with Amazon Web Services. Portland, Oregon, Lisbon, fantastic. Melbourne, lockdown Melbourne Central. There's actually more than 100,000 AWS questions because not all of them are tagged with Amazon Web Services, but you can then see who are the top users of those particular tags. There's Marcin, as we saw the other day. In the last 30 days, he has answered over 300 questions on Amazon Web Services. Good work, Marcin. I would love to see all your names up there as well. Portugal, Lisbon. Let's see what that is. Portugal. Let's drop into your home there, wizard, where you live. Oh, very nice. Like a historic part of town there. Oh, fantastic. I love all of these historical towns. Must be awful for driving. Fantastic for historical purposes. This thing looks very impressive down here. The public square with cafes and all that. Fantastic. Marcin should be paid for answering that many questions. Yes, so that's an interesting topic. We have a thing called the AWS Builders Community, and everyone is welcome to apply for the Builders Community, and it offers resources, mentorship, and networking opportunities to AWS enthusiasts and thought leaders who are passionate about sharing knowledge with the technical community. Exactly what they are. So I know that Marcin and Chris Williams, some names you'll see on AWS, have applied for this program. The first wave is closing soon. So the idea is we are recognizing people who are doing great things out there on AWS and saying, hey, thanks for doing all that. Let's give you some stickers. Let's give you some swag. Let's give you access to information to help you carrying on to do that. And the bar for the Community Builders program is much lower than the Community Heroes program. The AWS Community Heroes program is normally for people who do things like run user groups or events that are around cloud technologies. I'd like to reward all of them for doing things as well. So there's the Community Heroes, fantastic. There's the Community Builders, yay! And then there's even you folks who are just answering things on Stack Overflow, which I highly encourage you to be doing. So there we are in Lisbon. That looks really, really great. Let's just drop down for a bird's eye view. I've not been there myself. Wow, it looks like the set of a the Da Vinci Code. Who writes all of the Dan Brown Vinci Code? Dan Brown. Dan Brown. So it looks like the setting for a Dan Brown novel. Fantastic. With a cruise ship, we don't see many of them anymore. Hello, cruise ship. Good to have you on board. Hey, Walsh. Let's pick another question to answer. We've done our blockchain. We didn't answer it, but we had fun creating a tag for it. Can you set files as hidden in an S3 bucket? Is there a possibility to set a file as hidden in S3 like it works on Windows or Mac with the dot prefix? I don't mean to restrict the access by setting a permission for a user, but just to have the file to be hidden, which you wouldn't normally see if you browse the buckets with a default setting. So what does it mean by hidden? If I go to a Linux machine and I say, show me my various files in here. I have various files on this machine. If I do an ls-a, means all files, you will also see files that begin with a dot. And this is a way in the file system to hide certain things. For example, there is an AWS directory which contains credentials information and things like that. And because it's prefixed with a dot, if I do a normal listing of my directory, the AWS directory does not show up. So it's not blocked off access, but it's a way of saying by default, don't show that particular file or directory. So they'd like to do that for S3, which is an interesting concept. Somebody is suggesting using versioning. So versioning, that's interesting. You could create an object. You could then turn on versioning and delete the object. The default view in S3 is that the object will not appear to be there unless you say, show me all the versions previously. But they probably don't want to delete the object just to make it disappear. Having a second shadow bucket might be interesting. Yeah. And somebody's come along and said it's not possible. On the other hand, you could limit which folders the user can list and make such hidden structures different. So there's a couple of links here that are useful. And yes, I think this is the famous example. It's the famous example. No, this is not the famous example. There's something, oh yes, it is. Let's say you had a policy that said somebody is allowed to do something in S3, but they can only access their own directory, say /David, within their S3 bucket. But this means for every user, you would have to give them a different policy based upon their username. It can take a long time to do that. There is a thing in IAM called a policy variable that allows you to write a policy like this. And you can say they are allowed to access their bucket /AWS username. So they can take the IAM username, incorporate that automatically within the policy and say, you can access the subdirectory within this bucket that happens to match your IAM username. And so that one policy can be applied to many different users without you having to put a different policy on each user. So a very handy thing to know there within your IAM policies for S3. But I don't know otherwise how to hide things. Maybe we can ask why. Now, if you put a comment on a question, as I just did, then any response that comes along will automatically appear in this little inbox within Stack Overflow. So if you come back here at a later time, it'll highlight any comments or things that are put on any question that you have participated in by providing an answer or by adding a comment on there. So it's a good way to get feedback about questions you are participating in. Next. Gordon Linoff. S3 bucket starts downloading an image instead of opening it. I have this line of code for uploading an image. I receive the image in base64 format. The issue is I cannot open the image from the bucket. It wants to download it from my computer. So you've probably seen this a lot when you click a PDF file or a JPEG or something. Sometimes it opens up in the browser. Sometimes it downloads. And this can be very annoying of what you want to do about it. And it really comes down to this thing here. When you retrieve a file across the internet, there's a standard header called a content type. And this indicates to the browser what type of content is in that bucket. And setting that content type can be really, really handy. So let's have a bit of a play with this and see if we can understand how it works. Hey Zazu. Let's create Stack Zazu bucket. Good to have you on board. Thanks for joining me. My name is John. I'm playing with Stack Overflow questions. So I've created a Zazu bucket and I will upload. Let's start with uploading an image. A picture of a cat. And if we look closely at the upload that just took place, there is some metadata that has been associated with this upload. So the browser, S3 AWS something, noticed that it's a JPEG file. So it attached this content metadata type saying it's an image/JPEG. And that means if I go to the object and say I want to open it, my browser opens it within my window. Let's see if we can sabotage this. And let's go to the metadata and let's edit that and say it's a text file, content type text file. It would be text plain. So I'll say that it is a text file now. What happens if I try and open that up? I'm going to do a refresh of my page, hoping it doesn't cache what was there. I then say open the picture and it's opened it in there. I don't know if it cached properly, so I'm going to upload another picture. See if we can do our trick. Now it might be that a text file is not a great test because the browser also wants to open the text file. So I'll actually choose a different type here. I want object properties, metadata, edit, content type for a what never gets loaded, maybe a I don't know, I'm going to put something in here, John/John. So it is clearly not a file type that it understands. Let's now try and open that, and you'll see that it tried to download it. So the browser recognized this is not a file type that I want to display in the browser. Therefore, it has triggered a download. So a lot of it seems to be related to that. However, you can override the settings in your browser telling it whether or not to download. So sometimes you want a PDF to open in the browser. Sometimes you want it to open up in Acrobat Reader. So you can change that in your browser. The mysterious thing here is this person does appear to be uploading the content type in there. So did they use the correct code to make this happen? they've said in Python, put the object with some content, and they've attached content type as a parameter of put object. Let's see if that is a correct parameter. We'll go to the documentation for Python SDK for AWS, which is called Boto3. They use something called put object. And put object takes, yes, indeed, it does take a content type. So that theoretically should have uploaded correctly using the content type. So what I might do is try doing something like this myself. Coding on the fly. Import, shouldn't code on the fly, we should put in a file. Import Boto3, paste in their line, S3 equals Boto3 client. This is how you create a client object in there. Brads, you can hit F12, right click on the reload button in Chrome to allow you to empty the cache. Oh, thank you. Thought you were going to tell me how I could override the content. I'm just going to say the content is equal to of code here. I'm going to upload to that bucket that we just created. It's called StackOverflow. File name equals stack PNG. Doesn't really matter what we call it. And we want to make sure that this image PNG thing works correctly. Let's give that a try. Instance, put it on my local machine. Hi, let's see what happens when I run this program. It is saying it doesn't like me because I have an extra quote inside of here. Let's run it again. It's saying it doesn't like me because I took out both quotes this time for sure. Okay, so it ran. Let's go to S3, refresh the list of objects. Here's my stack PNG. I go to the properties, look at the metadata. It did indeed do that. So I can't see a problem of what they use. They seem to have uploaded that correctly. If I try and open this file, it will fail because I didn't give it a real JPEG. It will attempt to open it and then it will say the picture did not work. But it looks to me that their code worked perfectly good. So there. Too bad if it's not working for you. Your code is looking very good to me. Excellent. What else do we have fun here? Oh, another bit of AWS news. Apparently, we just came out with a new EBS volume type. EBS stands for Elastic Block Store, which is the virtual disk you attach to your virtual machine. And we have various varieties of that. And we've come out with a new IO2 type that is more durable and has more IOPS per second. Let's explain what that means. If I go to my EC2 console and I go and create a disk volume, and I say, please create me a volume, it says, what type of volume do I want to create? So in the old days, we had magnetic storage. Don't use it. Then we came out with general purpose SSD, which gets faster as you store more data. So the bigger the disk, the faster it gets up until a certain point. So you can just say, please use it. And here it's saying I will get 300 IOs per second. If I do it as a gig, it gives me 3000 IOPS, which is the maximum you can get out of a single volume. So the bigger the volume, faster it is, the smaller, the slower. So general purpose typically works pretty well. If in doubt, use a general purpose volume. If you want something faster, we've got provisioned IOPS. And when you do that, you can tell us exactly how many IOs per second you want. up to a maximum of 64,000 IOPS, which is hugely fast. Really good for a database. Databases do lots of disk access. You want the disk to go really fast. Provision of IOPS is good. Please note you pay for the speed of the disk. So don't just say I want a really fast disk for the fun of it. You pay for it. So a general purpose volume is 10 cents per gig per month. So if you've got 100 gig volume, that's $10 for the month. Oh, you pay for the volume based on the size it is, regardless of whether you are using it or not. We provision that space and we charge you for it. Then we have provision IOPS, and I just chose an IO1 volume. 12.5 cents per month of provision storage, so slightly more expensive, and 6.5 cents per provisioned IOPS month. This is where it gets confusing. So if I ask for 1,000 IOPS, I think it means it will be 1,000 times 6.5 cents, which means there'll be a $65 charge for getting that 1,000 IOPS drive. So be careful. If you ask for 64,000, that can be a lot of money, but it's a very, very fast disk. So we have now come out with this additional IO2 drive, and it says that it is a higher durability and it's more reliable. But I notice the price is the same. IO2, the price is exactly the same. So use it. If it's better and no additional price, use it. But it looks like we are not converting all of your old disks to the new one. So when you're creating new ones, by all means, choose the new one. What is the difference between all of them? AWS types. There is a good documentation page. Put here in chat. We have the new IO2, and all it's saying is it's gone from 99.9% durability to 99.999%, which is actually hugely difficult to do. If you've ever tried lots of 9s in IT, getting those last 9s is really hard. So I know that EBS replicated to multiple volumes within the same data center. So if a disk failed, we have another couple of copies on other disks. So I don't know if they're using better disks or more disks or something here, but that's the major change. There's a couple of other volume types here. Sometimes you want your disk to be having a high I/O. Databases, for example, they read a bit from here, a bit from there, a bit from there, a bit from there. They're random seeking all over the place, and you want a good disk to do that. An SSD is fantastic for that, because the traditional disk, a magnetic disk where you had to wait till the head was over a particular spot of the disk, doesn't matter with SSD. But there are still some use cases for traditional hard disk devices. And the reason for that is, rather than getting good random I/O where you pull information from all over the disk, maybe you want guaranteed throughput, pulling in lots of information from the disk. And hard disks are very good at that, especially if you're reading concurrent information. So let's say you've got a multi-gigabyte file on disk and you're reading that whole file in. The head doesn't have to seek to somewhere, it's just pulling that in. So we have these two different types: throughput optimized, designed for frequently accessed throughput optimized workloads. So this is great when you're pulling lots of information, and it is 500 megs per second it can pull in, which is a lot of data to be pulling in. Additional cost supply. So if you want it a bit slower, we have a cold HDD, which can pull in only 250 megs per second, but it again has very good sustained throughput. So not for random access, good for sustained throughput. And if we look at the pricing page, EBS, you can see the price difference. The throughput optimized is lower price than normal SSD, so only 4.5 cents, and that cold one only 2.5 cents. So this is really good. If you don't want to put things in S3, you want to have them in directly attached storage to your disk. You can have some very low priced storage in there. Really neat. And there was another recent announcement with AWS EBS, which totally destroys the way I used to teach how EBS works. How often do you streaming? I try to stream at this time minus an hour and a half every week. Sometimes we have other events on, but by all means join me for this stream. At the moment, an hour and a half every week. Thanks, Wizard. We recently announced that EBS allows multi-attached on provisioned IOPS volumes. So this is mind-boggling. This means you can attach one disk to multiple EC2 instances that we always said was never possible. You used to have to use things like EFS, the Elastic File System, to have a constant store across multiple volumes, whereas here you can now attach the same disk to more than one EC2 instance. So this is pretty amazing, no additional charge. And I say save recovery time because you can just attach an existing disk rather than have to rebuild your disk. I haven't tried it, but hey, learn something new all the time. Let's pick another question to answer here. Lightsail. Many of you might not be aware of AWS Lightsail. This person, I recently discovered AWS new service called Lightsail. It's not that new. You're charged by the month, which is good, unlike EC2, which is billed by the minute. However, there seems to be some extra costs. Not able to understand it, blah, blah, blah. So what is Lightsail? I don't know about you. Whenever I think of the word Lightsail, I always think of Tron. In the original Tron movie, there was this big ship called the Beam Runner, and it sort of has big sails and it runs on this light beam. I always think of a light sail coming out in Tron. And pricing for Lightsail. Are you going to continue hosting the basic stream on Wednesdays? So yes, Spreads. So we have another stream. Thank you for distracting me yet again. We have a stream called Let's Code that is, at the time you're watching now, minus 2.5 hours, minus 1 day in your local time zone. It's 10 a.m. in Sydney. Sorry, 11 a.m. in Sydney. So it's an hour and a half and a day before now. And this is a series called Let's Code, where we introduce all the concepts for services starting from the beginning, specifically aimed at developers. We had an episode this week on containers. Next week, we are covering different techniques to SSH into your instances. We've done things on storage, S3, on compute, on Lambda, and you can find them on my YouTube channel. I'll give you a link to the previous episodes that are here. And the whole idea is, if you are new to AWS and you're developer focused and you want to learn about various concepts, in 1 hour, we give you what you need to know on S3, on EC2, on Lambda, on containers, etc. I will be hosting some of those episodes depending on my expertise. I'll be doing the ones for the next couple of weeks. We also have other developer advocates in EMEA, in the Europe time zone, doing those so that people around the world can get them. But otherwise, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel through there. And by all means, have a watch. And they are streamed live. You can ask questions as you go and do it. So, Lightsail. EC2 is a little bit confusing. You may have noticed that. These network VPC concepts, EC2 instance types, AMIs, is very confusing. And a lot of other companies out there offer internet services where they simply say, $20 a month, run your server, done. And Lightsail is the Amazon equivalent to that. And it's called a VPS, a virtual private server. And with very simple pricing, you can come along and ask for a virtual machine. And you'll notice the pricing is given by month. However, I have found from another source that the pricing is actually charged per, it was correct in here, the price is monthly for Lightsail. So even though you, sorry, it's billed hourly. So even though we charge you, we show the prices per month. If you're only running for half a month, that's fine. We charge you per hour. And the really neat thing is, number one, it's a straightforward low cost per month. Number two, it includes a certain amount of data transfer. And this is the really best bit. Is $3.50 cheap for a VPS? Let's have a look. If I go to EC2 pricing, this machine is a half a gig of memory, 1 core, 20 gig storage. So if we look at the EC2 pricing, and I go for, let's say, a nano instance, which has half a gig of memory, 2 CPUs, so it's similar-ish. It is charged at ½ cent an hour. I take that and say 24 hours a day times 30 days a month, that comes out to about $3.50-ish. So the answer is, it's about the same price for that bottom end one as a T3 nano instance. But Lightsail also includes a terabyte of data transfer traffic. Now, data transfer is normally charged. Inbound is always free. Outbound is around about 10 cents per gig after the first gig. So getting a terabyte is 1,000 gigs. So 9 cents times 1,000 is $90 worth of data transfer traffic included in that $3.50 a month. So yes, this is a fantastic price. As you go up in the machines, they include more and more data transfer traffic. Now, before you get too excited, do not think you can send all your traffic through a Lightsail instance to avoid your costs. There is something in the terms and conditions of Lightsail saying you will not do that. It is not designed to give you cheaper data transfer. It is designed to give you a basic single machine, a small number of machines without a complex setup. So do not try to abuse the concept in there. And the neat thing about Lightsail is, give it a try. When you launch your instance, Lightsail in the normal console, but it looks totally different. You'll notice the URL changes. I'm going to lightsail.aws blah blah blah. It's really designed as a separate service. Has all of these pretty graphics, very different console. Good afternoon. Would you like to create an instance? So it's giving a nice simple way of launching things. You're in Sydney. You want Linux or Windows? You want Linux? Do you want blah blah blah? So they might say, oh, I would like to have a WordPress site. It then says you can have a launch script, a key pair, choose your pricing bracket. So the pricing is there in the console. Give it a name and bang. So one screen, and you can launch your instance very, very quickly. So it's designed for people who just want a WordPress or who, what's under Windows, just want a simple Windows server. They don't understand all this cloud stuff. They just want to get out there going and know that what they are paying for, in this case, it includes the Windows license fee. They know exactly what they're getting for their price without all of this complex. So Lightsail has its place. Typically, if a company is using VPCs and EC2, they don't care about Lightsail. It's almost a different audience that might come along. But it's the Amazon way of saying, hey, don't look at that competitor over there offering good prices. We can offer you something like that as well. So the question saying, do I have to stop my Lightsail instance? It's billed by the month. There seems to be some extra costs. I'm not able to find out what it could be. Should I stop my Lightsail instance when I'm not using it? So the simple answer in AWS, of course, is if you're not using something, turn it off because you'll save money. So yes, turn it off. But if you're using your machine as a WordPress site, you don't want to turn it off because somebody might be going to your website. So it's totally up to you. Somebody, a few hours ago has provided an answer. There's additional costs for going over that networking bandwidth in too many DNS queries. That's interesting. Snapshots and load balancers. But otherwise, everything is included in that price, which is really neat. So thank you, Lightsail. Looks like there is already a tag. Oh, that's interesting. Somebody has edited this tag. And they're putting their questions about server administration or off topic. Consider going to server fault for that. Since there is a number of operating system options on Lightsail that will help people answer what you're indicating. So what they're saying is there is another site. This is a sister site to Stack Overflow that is called Server Fault. And Server Fault is designed for system administrators. So if you're a professional, an IT professional who is doing things day in, day out with IT, Server Fault is a great place to go. It's not programming. It's all about administering servers. Get the official blurb for what it is. I only have 600 points on Server Fault. I'm not that big. Server Fault is Q&A for system and network administrators. And then there's Super User, which is Q&A for computer enthusiasts and power users. So that's more, how do I use Windows to do this type of thing for? Fantastic. What else do we have here? Something fun to talk about. I found this website. It was pretty good. Put it to you in the chat. The AWS.blog is somebody's personal cheat sheet catalog for everything related to AWS. Not necessarily just because you're doing a certification exam, but they've got a lot of very interesting information in here. They have something on light sale, they do not. Let's go for storage cheat sheet. Oh wow, they've got all these pretty pictures showing you the different types of storage. S3, Elastic File System, Elastic Block Store. They're comparing against them. Like they've grabbed the material from various places. Let's find something else. EC2 cheat sheet. Explaining different security options, billing options, graphics grabbed from AWS. It looks like they have found interesting information from around the interwebs and they've put it all into one place. So that could be a handy place to go to, whether you're studying for something or just generally looking up about AWS. Have you ever heard of something called LE5? Is it defined? Not really. I was on Reddit one time, and I was trying to answer some questions, and somebody came up and said, could you LE5 S3 for me? Well, I can try it. Reddit LE5 S3. I think this is it. Somebody asked for an LE5 on S3, and nope, I can't see it. So LE5, the idea is explain it to me like I'm 5. And this is a really interesting concept because a lot of cloud concepts can be quite mystifying. People say, what's the difference between these two services? So having something where you can explain things like to a 5-year-old, not really like a 5-year-old, but explaining things in a simple concept is something I'm quite excited in. So what do you think? Would it be worthwhile creating a wiki out there or something that explains all AWS concepts in LE5 so that people can just get the gist of what is a quantum ledger database? What is the managed blockchain? What are all these services? If you think that's a good idea, just say so in chat, and it would encourage me to go out there and do it. If you like LE5 type concepts, you might be aware of XKCD, which is a fantastic webcomic. He chose the domain name because no one is likely to choose that domain name. And he's got some fantastic books out there. And one of his books is not the What If book, the Thing Explainer. So some of Randall's comics he wrote, such as an Upgoer 5. This is a comic he did which explained a rocket ship using only the 1,000 words people use most often. So he couldn't say the top 1,000 words because 1,000 isn't a popular word. So he's using the top 1,000 words. So he can't say escape catchall. He has to say thing to control which direction the escaping people go. He couldn't say it's reclining lounge. He has to call it a chair. The engines are called fire comes out of here. So it's a very LE5 type way of explaining things. And he's come out with a book called The Thing Explainer. And the whole contents is written in LE5 type thing. That cartoon was called the Upgoer 5 because rocket ship is not in the 1,000 words. Thanks for the comments if you think that's useful. We've got time for a few more questions. This was interesting. How to trigger a particular version of Lambda from an S3 event. Somebody's using Lambda. Anymesh is using Lambda to process files coming into S3. As time will pass, functionality will grow. Each month I will change the Lambda. So I want to publish version 1.2.3. How do I make the S3 bucket trigger a particular version of Lambda for the files? And I didn't know. So let's explain what's going on here. In S3, you can configure an event. And you can come in here and say, when somebody creates an object in this particular bucket with a given prefix or suffix, then please trigger a Lambda function to process that particular event, S3 event here. So, quick summarize. Somebody uploads an object in S3, that upload triggers a Lambda function. The Lambda function can then be invoked it receives the name of the bucket and the object, and that will then allow that Lambda function to process that particular file. And down here, you'll notice I'm choosing my Lambda function that I want to trigger, but Lambda functions can have multiple versions. So where can you say which version of a Lambda function you want to trigger? Let's try and have a bit of a play with that. I'll create a function here called stack version. Give it a roll. Create the function. I've never created Lambda versions before, so this will be a first time for all of us. Have a look here. So I now have my function, got some default text in here. I don't care about that. Now, somehow I can create a new version. Okay, so let's publish a new version of this function. I'm going to call it version 2. And it now appears that I have a pull down, so I can choose version 1 or version 2. So in here, I'm going to say goodbye. Let me edit it. Let me version 1. Refresh the page. I'm on version 1. Let's go to version 2. Oh no. Oh, that's :1. Okay. I will say good. I cannot edit. Code is only available. Code and editor handling is only available for the latest version. Okay. I will go to the latest version. Edit that. Learning stuff today. We'll say goodbye. Save that, and let's create yet another version. Oh, publish new version. Which version? Okay. Version 3 or something. So I'm now creating multiple versions. There is an alias. The alias of $latest points to my latest version. So by default, when you call a function, it will always use the latest version. But you can create an alias. So you might have an alias pointing to the production version and the test version. And that's how you can point to the different versions of the same function. And so I go and say, I would like to edit the latest version. And good night. So I now have 2 or 3 different versions in there. Let's now go back to S3, refresh my S3 page, and see if I can create an event. Somebody creates an object, send it to Lambda, and what did I call it? I called it my stack version function. So stack version, you'll notice it is not allowing me to choose a version. So what do? How do you get it to trigger a particular version of your Lambda function? So it happens that I discovered a documentation page. And this one explains it all. So it explains about publishing new Lambda versions, all the information, and it turns out you can I'm going to add qualify. So you can use, you attempt to invoke a function without an alias, you get a specific permission error. So there's a way you can, through the command line interface, tell it which version to use by specifying the alias within the name. I'm now worried that I gave an incorrect answer to the question because it didn't directly relate to S3. I thought it did. When you use a resource-based policy here, for example, the following command grants S3 permission to invoke the prod alias of a hello world function when S3 is acting on behalf of example bucket. And apparently there's this thing in here that allows you to specify the identifier for, which is the alias for the function that you are running. So hopefully that is the correct answer there. Brad's was doing some research on, is that on GitHub? 5 users for free, $1 every month after that. Didn't GitHub just change some pricing where it's now free or something? Lots of options out there for getting low-cost websites. I might have got the one right. I might not have got the one right. That. Another bit of interesting information. Let's see what I've got up here. Yes, I saw an interesting library someone mentioned. Principal Mapper is a script and library for identifying risks in the configuration of an IAM account. So sometimes you want to know what permissions are being granted to people and might they be getting more permissions than you expect. And this thing can apparently visualize some very pretty things. I'll put in the chat. Some interesting visualizations, or I have to zoom into this tab. It provides some sort of mapping between different AWS resources and shows how this user could assume this particular Lambda role, which could give them Lambda full access. So sometimes you're not aware that you are granting somebody permission that they can take advantage of and use in some other way to access other resources. So this looked like a very interesting library for doing a visual mapping of your IAM resources. Thought I'd mention it out there. If you're a security person, your life must be hard enough as it is. This will help you visualize some things that are out there. And another thing, bulk transfer. No, I don't know what that was. Okay, time for another question. Talking of security. How to transcribe from S3 server-side encryption customer provided key. So this person was wanting to use the AWS transcribe service that takes a sound file and converts it into text. And it's really fun to play with. Transcribe. Transcribe is really neat, and it has this ability to do real-time transcription. Let's give it a try here. I just hit the start streaming button, let it use my microphone, and as I am typing, it is going to write out exactly what I'm saying. I just paused after that sentence to create a full stop. Use Amazon Transcribe Medical to transcribe medical speech into real-time text, whether your use case is in clinical documentation, pharmacovigilance, telemedicine, or another segment. So here it is typing out exactly what I'm saying and doing a fairly nice job for it. It's actually got an HTTPS communication to the back end, listening to what I'm saying and then typing it out. So it's like your very own Siri you can have in your web page. So transcribe is actually pretty interesting. So you can take advantage of transcribe to convert your text into speech. Sorry, convert your speech into text. But that's not what the interesting thing about this particular question was. This person was saying they're using server-side encryption with a customer-provided key. So if for those of you who have been experimenting with AWS and KMS, our key management service, there are different ways to encrypt your data. And normally if you say, I want to upload to S3, go back to our S3 bucket, and you want to encrypt the data at rest. So I can come in here and I can say, my cat picture is very important. I would like to change the encryption, and I'm going to choose AES 256, which is a standard encryption algorithm. I say save, and S3 takes care of all the encryption keys. It generates a unique encryption key, encrypts the data, encrypts the encryption key using a master key, and then stores it there. If I now come back and say, I want to look at that particular picture and I want to open it, it decrypts it for me on the fly and provides back the picture. So I don't have to worry about any encryption keys. However, there is a concept of customer provided encryption keys. And let's see if I can get this working. I want to specify encryption. I can specify an Amazon S3 master key, which is what I just did. I can specify a KMS master key, which is where I can control the keys that are being used in the KMS service. Or I can specify a customer key. And it looks like I can't do that in the console, because when you upload via the customer key, you have to provide the encryption key that is used to encrypt the object. S3 will then encrypt it, save it, and throw away the key. So the only time you can access the object again is by providing that customer provided key again. And that's the crux of this question. It looks like they have a file saved in S3 using a customer provided key. So when they uploaded the file, they said, please upload it using my particular key pair, and here it is. Then they tried to run a Amazon Transcribe job on that file, but S3 could not read the file because S3 does not keep a copy of that key. So there is no way to pass to the transcription service, here is the key to use. So they actually have to find a different way of using the key. So the object was encrypted with a key that AWS does not store, therefore it cannot do it for you. So I found that quite interesting. It's very rare to see customer provided keys, but that's a nice example of someone encrypting using that key pair. Very secure, because no one can access your data in S3 unless they have that key to decrypt the data with. Very good. So that's taking us up to the hour or so. So thank you for joining me on this show, talking about different shows that are coming up. It's probably worth looking at the, oh no, I'm going to watch myself. Don't watch myself. I want to go to the schedule page. If I watch myself, I will cause the universe to melt down. I will instead go to the schedule page down here and point out a few shows that might be of interest to you. You are currently watching AWS on StackOverflow. So I do this at this time -2 hours each week. The day before this time of day, we have another show. It's hard to see here on the schedule. And one is called that Developers Let's Code, which I showed you before, which is our regular aimed at developers. And there's also the CQ, the certification quiz show, where we go through certification exams. A lot of them are available on my YouTube channel. So I'll put that link back in for the Let's Code, and you can have a look at other things running on my YouTube channel. So thank you very much for joining us this week, for joining me. I'm now going to have a lovely afternoon in Sydney. The sun has come out. It's a lovely warm day. In my YouTube channel, you will find such delights as the Developers Let's Code, AWS on Stack Overflow, and my favorite, the AWS Certification Quiz Show, where we have some sample AWS certification questions each week, and we bring on some experts trying to answer the questions, and you get to vote for what you think is the correct answer as well. So I invite you to participate in that show. Otherwise, thank you very much. Good to see you all. And join me same time next week, -2 hours, unless something else is on. So cheers. Thank you very much. Bye.